Personalization is an important topic for marketers, and we believe it should be considered an essential part of an overall experience optimization program. We believe that it is time for marketers to evolve from static testing and optimization to a more dynamic understanding of customer online behavior. And we believe that personalization can provide a more responsive, nimble way to offer relevant content to customers and prospective customers. Personalization requires a strategic mindset and adequate planning to be successful. You need to plan for and actively manage the volume of content that's required, and you need to have a testing and measurement approach in hand so that you can refine and focus your strategy and implementation. Today's briefing, The Path to Personalization, will provide you with a framework that can help you plan, design, and manage your content personalization and testing efforts. I want to thank Sitecore, our promotional partner, for this briefing. And now I am delighted to welcome our speakers, Amanda Bernard, Director of Digital Marketing at ISITE Design, and Derek Phillips, Content Strategy Practice Lead at ISITE Design. Amanda?
Thank you, Barbara. First, a little bit about ISITE. We are ISITE Design, a digital experience agency with offices in Portland, Oregon, and Boston, Massachusetts. You might be wondering why we're so excited to talk about personalization. Well, first off, we design, build, and optimize digital experiences for our clients every day, and we've been doing it for over 17 years. Our connected expertise in digital strategy, experience design, marketing technology, analytics, and optimization allow us to align the needs of our customers' customers with the business objectives of our client's organization to deliver meaningful digital experiences that have a measurable return on investment. We were also recognized by Forrester as one of the top digital experience agencies. But enough about us. Let's start talking about personalization. So today we'll touch on what is personalization in the digital world, what the potential value is to your organization, and more importantly, your customers. We'll also give an overview of the many options for personalizing content. Finally, we'll share our point of view on how you should start down the path towards delivering personalized experiences. We see a significant opportunity for brands to focus their content development efforts, simplify the user experience, provide value to customers with relevant, useful content, reduce the sales cycle or the lead gen process, and fine-tune those processes along with sales and lead qualification processes. But unfortunately, technology is outpacing implementation. We see companies not really taking advantage of personalization, and more customers are starting to expect it. They give you data and want something meaningful in return. So speaking of implementation, let's get to our first polling question. Where are you at currently on your path to personalization? Are you really just getting started, or are you not personalizing at all? Or are you a little bit further along and starting to deliver some personalized content? Or is most of your content currently personalized? Wow, so it looks like some people are starting to plan, but haven't really gotten started yet with the implementation. That's a lot of what we see as well. A lot of our clients are really thinking about this, but aren't quite sure where to get started. And a lot of you are already doing this, so great. That's awesome to see that. So let's talk a little bit about what is personalization. Personalization allows us to provide more relevant content to audience segments and deliver customized content for specific users via a personalized digital experience. In the digital realm, these personalized experiences are delivered via a content management system or sometimes with built-in capabilities, like Sitecore's digital marketing system, for example. Or sometimes you're integrating your CMS with another third-party tool to deliver your personalization. But for today's purposes, we're talking about personalized experiences that happen on the web. And there's quite a spectrum because this has been happening actually for quite a while. It's not really new per se. So websites like Amazon have been doing this for years. But the old way was really to provide a personalized experience after you already logged in. While this may seem like one-to-one marketing is kind of the holy grail, or explicit personalization, as we like to call it, but it's usually viewed as something that marketers are strived for. But there's really a ton of value and lift that can be generated by focusing on implicit personalization as well. And the dirty little secret is hardly anyone is personalizing. We've discussed this with our technology partners like Sitecore, and people aren't adopting personalization at the velocity that we'd expect. Brands are testing and doing some targeting, but they aren't personalizing. And we just saw that with the results of the poll that we just did. And those who are really starting to do the basics, but not really taking advantage of implicit personalization.
Let's talk a bit about the value. Before we get into that, let's clarify what we mean by personalized. When we're talking about personalization, we're talking about delivering specific information to our customers based on what we know about them. And we're going to talk through some of the ways we get to that point and what we mean by that. But really, let's start with the value of content, because it's a commitment. It's an investment. And we really want to understand what the value is in that investment. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about what the value is to your brand. So there's a lot of talk around brand affinity. And when we at ISITE think about brand affinity, we have the saying that brands that are loved win. And that's really what we're talking about. If customers enjoy interacting with your brand, there's a lot more opportunity for business with them. So brand affinity is one potential value for personalization. Customer insights are important. We're going to talk a bit about how we start to learn from our customers based on the types of content we serve up to them and how they respond to it. So there are a lot of opportunities to learn more about our customers by focusing the information we provide to them. Of course, there are revenue options. If we are serving up relevant products and services, they're more likely to engage with those services. And then there's support. How can we move from support being a noun to a verb? How do we actually support our customers through the various experiences that we're creating for them? Well, we do that by targeting the information we're giving them and making sure that it's something that's really relevant. That also helps us to really design this type of service that we're providing our customers online. So the value to our customer becomes pretty clear when we just look at one graphic that was taken from a survey last year. So if we look at this graphic here, we can see that the high importance of targeted personalized content by channel becomes pretty clear, particularly in our social channels, our web channels, our email, and our cross channels. That makes sense though, right? If we're speaking directly to our customers, we're showing that we're actually listening to them, we're trying to meet their needs. That is a level of service that customers are expecting now, and they really start to look for that customized experience, and we deliver that through the type of information we're providing them. But it's also important for us to actually show that value. Let's not just assume that they understand the value. Let's show that value, because 57% of our customers are okay with providing information to us as long as they understand how it's improving their experience with us. And 77% would trust us even more if we were very clear about that and we explained how we're using that personal information to improve that online experience. So as we take a look at a couple of examples, those are the things that we're going to keep in mind. How are we using this information to create a better experience, and have we shown that value? If we look at the music streaming companies that are out there right now, they've been doing this a long time. It's essentially their business model is to provide more relevant content to their customers. So they do that by not only asking you explicitly what types of bands or music are you interested in, what songs do you really love, but as you're interacting with these services, tracking what you are listening to more, what you're liking, what you're sharing with your friends, to start to put together customized playlists and recommend new music to you based on what we know you already like. We can also take a look at Dropbox as an example. We've got a bit of a hang-up here. Let me see if I can restart our slide here. So we can take a look at Dropbox as a great example. Dropbox has a really cool email campaign where they are actually pointing out to customers services of theirs that those customers are not yet taking advantage of. This example right here is where they've recognized some behavior and said, hey, we actually have a service that's available to you that actually makes that system or that process that you're going through even more efficient. We have a quote here from the customer here that it was reminding me of a product or feature I didn't even know existed or just forgot about, that definitely makes my experience infinitely more better and more efficient. That's how we start to build that brand affinity. We're not just thinking about things from our business perspective, but from our customer's perspective. So time for another question. What's the potential value of personalization to your customers? Where do you see the value right now? Is it to simplify a complex selection of number choices? For instance, we know that a lot of us have some complex systems in place. Can we make that easier for our customers by targeting the content based on what we know about them? Can we reduce noise in our digital channels and really start to focus the information we're providing? Can we strengthen that customer bond to our brand and really make that more of a relationship than a transaction? And can we anticipate our customers' needs? Where do you see the potential value for your customers? A lot of the things that we see with both our clients and from looking around at some case studies is really helping to strengthen that customer brand becomes more important as we have more and more options out there. If we are talking about servicing our customers, again, that's all about really understanding their needs, what they're interested in. It's this concept of know me and show me. If you know who I am, then show me the information that's actually relevant to me. So we see a lot of potential in strengthening that brand promise right there and that engagement. We can also, tied to that, anticipate our customers' needs. Task completion is really important to our customers. They're coming to our digital channels for information. So if we can anticipate what information they're looking for and serve it up, it becomes even more important to them and more valuable. So let's see what you guys are thinking. Looks like we have a lot of interest in strengthening the customer brand or the bond to your brand and anticipating your customer needs, a little bit around reducing the noise. And what we mean by that, again, is really focusing our experiences. Anything that doesn't support what our customers are actually interested in looking for is a distraction. And that's what we mean by just reducing that noise. Okay? So let's get back to the presentation here. There are a lot of different themes and methods of detection out there, some of which you're going to be already familiar with, some of which are going to be maybe new to a lot of us just joining us. Some things like geo-targeting and location-based targeting, campaign and landing experiences, understanding where our customers are in the life cycle and how do we start to adjust our calls to action based on what we know the customer has already seen and done. So let's start with browsing behavior. A lot of us are probably very familiar with the idea of when we go to YouTube, we start to see ads from REI or Volkswagen or whatever brand we might have recently engaged with. Well, we can expand that sort of thinking beyond just advertising and really start to surface the relevant content within our digital experiences, including our websites, using that same sort of idea, understanding where the customer's already been and already engaged with and looked at, to start to really focus the information on our digital channels. Why that's important is because, according to this Harris Interactive study from last year, about 75% of our customers actually get frustrated with websites who don't already do this. We've talked a little bit about the idea of the creepy factor and how much do we really focus this information? Well, not only are customers getting more comfortable with the idea of personalization, they're expecting it. They want us to show them that we have relevant information to their needs. There's also geolocation. So this is a fast rising trend, and it makes sense when we think about the fact that most of us are carrying our web browsers in our pocket on mobile devices. How do we start to take that information based on where we know a customer is to create that unique experience? One example is the Harlem Globetrotters. So this is a great case study where they actually looked at, or by taking geolocation information, they were able to personalize their homepage based on where that customer is and really customize the content on the page and more importantly, customize their calls to action to show them where the Globetrotters were playing next in their general area. They saw a 2-time increase in ticket referrals from just that one study. Let's talk a little bit about firmographics. So a lot of times when we're talking to clients, we get a lot of questions about our different approaches from B2C to B2B. From a content perspective, we're still talking to people. We have people who have needs, have concerns, have challenges in their lives. By taking a firmographic approach to that, understanding who they are, what their role is in the business, what industry they're in or what vertical they're in, and really focusing the information to them, we're serving their needs. They're people who are trying to get things done, and by understanding who they are and what they do, we can do that better for our clients and for our customers. The far end of the spectrum, as Amanda was talking about, is the idea of when we have a logged-in user. Logged-in users actually expect a lot more personalization from us because we actually have the data on them. We know what services they've purchased from us. We know what products they've been interested in before. They want us to make sure that we are acknowledging that and only providing information based on what we know about them. Again, this idea of know me and show me. Another opportunity here, though, is understanding the frequency and the recency of our web visits. So this could be a little bit more on the implicit side of things, and it could also be on the explicit side. This is on a scale. But how do we start to adjust our calls to action based on how many times the customers visit our website? The number of times and the recency of that visit tells us a bit about their intentions. They're more interested in the content that we have because they're coming back to it. So how do we start to adjust that content to acknowledge that? How do we offer products, services, and content based on what they did the last time we were here? We really want to understand those analytics and start to shape that experience, and then personalize that content based on the response rate per visit. So if they're coming back more and more often, what are they missing? What can we provide for them? What's the information they need to see more of? A recent case study for us is New England Biolabs, where we actually did just that. We adjusted the calls to action and the content on the page based on when customers had last visited and really started to adjust the experience every time they came to the site. But what happens when it goes wrong? There's risk here, and understanding those risks and planning for them is really important. One recent example here is what happens if we take that information we've asked the customers to provide to us, and then we don't do anything with it. We don't actually provide a unique experience for them. What if we ask them what their gender is and what types of clothing they might be interested in, and then we serve up content that's completely opposite of that? That's creating a broken experience, in fact. And so understanding the information that we have on customers and how that starts to play into the experience we're creating is really important. Likewise, we get into trouble when we make assumptions, right? Because as we all know, when we assume things, there's potential to be wrong. This example here is with ProFlowers, right? And it's a cool email campaign. So it was very targeted and very focused. And it was reminding people, hey, send your mom some flowers. In this case, it was over Thanksgiving. The recipient's mother's name, though, is actually in the email, and she had died 6 weeks previously, or 6 months previously. And that is just a sad reminder to that customer. So when we've made an assumption on the customer and start to really try to serve up that content that's going to be relevant and focused to them, we have to understand where the potential pitfalls are in the assumptions that we make and make sure that we've thought them through. So, yeah, go ahead. Are you ready, Amanda?
Yeah, I'm ready. Thanks, Derek. So how do you know when you're ready to start personalizing? Well, personalization is not just a feature in a tool. It's not something that you just flip a switch and you turn it on. It's really about thinking very thoughtfully about how you're going to stitch together these relevant experiences across devices and platforms, and that takes thoughtful planning and a strategic implementation. There's some key areas of personalization readiness that you should really consider before you get started. Strategic personalization requires that marketing, content, and technology leaders in the organization agree on the value of digital experience optimization, and they understand that personalization must be approached strategically and implemented over time. Again, you're not flipping a switch and suddenly everything on your website is personalized. You want to be rolling this out in a way that makes sense for you, makes sense for how you're going to be able to know if it's working or not working, and that's something that's going to have to build over time. You also want to assess where you're at with your measurement strategy and whether you have access to your customer data. So qualitative and quantitative data that's available to inform and enhance your personalization is really where you want to be at when you're starting to plan how you're going to approach this, and really the overall digital experience. If you don't have this in place, then your internal stakeholders should be ready to collaborate on developing a measurement strategy, or maybe even implementing a customer data program to help you better understand the needs of your customers. Personalization really works best when you can rely on both your web analytics data and real users to inform your strategy and your optimization efforts. It also requires, before you get started, that you take a look at your content strategy that you have, or maybe don't have, and the team that you have available to help you create content. So personalization means more content, exponentially more content, actually. And resources who can consistently create content are really required to sustain any successful personalization strategy. You're also going to want to assess where your current content strategy is at and determine what, if any, changes you might need to make before you roll out your personalized content. Personas and audience segments are also key for personalization. You want to think about how all of this hinges on your understanding of your target audience. The characteristics, behaviors, and preferences of your customers really need to be documented or at least well known as you develop your personalization strategy. And finally, technology. So although successful personalization really depends on a strategic, customer-centric approach, dynamic personalization on the web can't happen without the proper technology platform in place. If you have the technology today, that's great. Then you can just focus your planning efforts on how you're going to use it. But if you don't, then you're going to need to factor into your planning process a technology vendor selection, or just thinking about what is the right technology that's going to meet your specific personalization needs. And that's easier said than done, because you're probably dealing with what lots of marketers are dealing with today, which is a very complex marketing ecosystem. So you need to assess your current technology ecosystem and determine which personalization tool or tools are going to be right for you.
So before we dig into planning your path, there's a great question here about Facebook ads and personalization and what we think about it. And, you know, from my perspective, I think it's important to understand that the idea of advertising as being an interrupt and repeat model is fast coming to a close. So the idea that we're just going to serve up our message and repeat it until somebody actually takes action. The flip side of that is advertising is not actually going to go away. It just means that we're going to be more careful about it and more thoughtful about it. How we do that and how we actually turn advertising from a interrupt and repeat model into something that could actually be valuable to our customers is understanding who they are and what they're interested in and serving up ads that are actually relevant to them that they might be interested in purchasing. It does, though, also bring up a lot of questions around ethics and what types of information we are going to use to serve up those relevant ads, and then how that information gets repeated back to the customer. I think it's an ongoing debate that's still going on, but it's a great question, so thanks for submitting that. So we talk about planning and getting things together. We start with a question, though. What problems could personalization help solve in your organization? Why are you interested in personalization? What do you think that it's going to do for your company to justify the investment? Again, does it help us to focus our content development efforts? There's no shortage of content out there. Most of our companies are creating lots and lots of content. Is this an opportunity to really focus those efforts? Is it going to help us to simplify our customer experience? So again, if we're focused on who that customer is, we can provide a more relevant experience for them and simplify that experience. Is it going to provide customers value by really focusing on that relevant, useful content? What about the reduction in the sales cycle? Can we shorten that sales cycle by getting them further down the path? And then what about customer insights? Again, like we talked about when we first kicked off the discussion here, there are a lot of opportunities to learn about our customers here by how they respond to the content we're serving up to them. Where do you see the big the big opportunity for your company. You know, from our experience with a lot of our clients, we see a big opportunity to simplify that customer experience. Where can we help to really focus what customers are going to see so that it's limiting the distractions to them and helping them complete their tasks, helping them get to the information that they really find valuable. On the flip side again, yes, a lot of opportunity to shorten that sales cycle. Think about what a salesman does. They ask questions and then they respond to those questions. How do we get our digital channels to operate that same way? It's by understanding what the customers are looking for and then providing them that information. So if we're asking them questions, we're going to respond to those questions just like a salesman would. But let's see what you guys are thinking. A lot on providing value with relevant and useful content. No surprise there, right? That's what this is all about. Personalization is focused on that relevant and useful content. A lot on the customer experience as well. Not as much on the length of sales cycle, but it's something to think about because that's a real opportunity for efficiency within your organizations. So if we think about planning again, some of the problems that we can help solve in our organizations are really going to boil down to how we plan for it. When we approach a personalization project, we really think about it as it's 80% planning and 20% execution and optimization. It's a lot of focus on understanding where the opportunities are and where we can really start to implement a personalized experience to support the digital experiences we're creating, but also support our business objectives. So our focus is really across 4 main areas. So we look at content strategy, user experience, measurement, and then optimization. We'll take a look at each one of these and some of the things that we're thinking about during the planning phase. So understanding the content creation process and governance, you've heard us say it a couple times already. We're going to say it a couple more times, but this requires a lot of content, and that means that we have to have a content creation process in place to support that content. It also means we have to have a governance process in place to really think about those ethical issues, those legal issues, our brand positioning. Who gets to make the call on whether a piece of content is relevant and going to be supported? We need a governance structure in place to make those calls. We also want to map the content to our personas because that's who our customers are. They're represented in our personas. We're not doing one-to-one marketing here yet, unless we're talking about the logged-in state, but we are talking to actual customers, and they're represented through personas that are based on actual market data. We also want to understand the tagging and taxonomy of the content because that's what's going to allow our systems to actually support this experience we're creating. Understanding what we have is important, but understanding how it's interrelated to each other and gets served up in the experience through the technical systems is really important. So tagging and taxonomy becomes key to this. And then, again, the resources. We need to have resources to support this. And why? Because if we look at this graphic here, what we're really seeing is on the left, if we have a small, or let's start from the right. If we have a broad audience, we have a smaller content base because that content can speak to more people. As we start to narrow that audience, we need more content. The base of our content production becomes much larger because we're talking about creating more content. How does that actually look? Well, if we had 4 verticals and 3 roles within that vertical, that means we have 12 personalized content personas that we're trying to support, and then 1 baseline. We always want to have a default baseline in case we don't have information on that customer. That means we have 13 variants on each content object. So if our strategy then defines that we have 10 components within a user flow that we want to personalize, 10 bits of information we want to make sure are personalized, that then equals 130 different content objects to support that experience. That's just 1 flow. That's just 4 verticals and 3 roles. As we really expand this, you can see how the numbers add up very, very quickly. But that means that we're trying to create a user experience here. The content is part of the user experience that we're generating. So we want to make sure that we have some pillars in place, and we're going to plan for that. Understanding who those key customer segments are. We're not trying to customize for every potential segment or every potential persona, the one who's most likely to engage in those digital channels. And how we do that is understanding their emotions, their mindset, their motivations, the tasks they're trying to complete, and then again focusing that information. What are the various channels and the touch points within those channels where we can interact with the customer and provide personalized information that's actually valuable to them? We do that by really mapping out their journey. Where are they in the process? Where are they going? Where did they come from? And then being transparent about the information we're gathering. We've already talked about that. Transparency is really important, not only from an ethical standpoint, but from a value standpoint. Our customers actually value that if we're clear about it. And then we want to limit those segments because we're not going to roll this up to everybody all at once. We're going to test and repeat and understand what's really working. So speaking of, we want to have a measurement plan in place. So we're going to identify the business objectives. Because this is an investment, what objectives are we hoping to accomplish by personalizing our experience? What is the value of the engagement with that content for each persona type? How do we really focus our marketing funnels and our user flows and engage that customer in a way that's relevant to them and supports our business objectives? And then how do we identify those audience segments that we know are most relevant to this experience or most likely to be a good target? The last piece of this is we're going to optimize. Once we've figured out what's working, and where the opportunities are for improvement, how are we going to do that? How do we align our engagement and lead generation models to acquisition? How do we optimize the testing and the data analysis and then report out on that performance? These are all of the things that are going on when we are approaching a personalization process. And this is the planning side of things because we really want to be able to report back on whether this was a valuable experience. So the last piece here is really talking about the technology. The technology is super important. It's what actually makes this all happen. So selecting the right tool is important. That means we have to have our strategy in place first, so we select the right tool to support that strategy and to create the experience we're trying to really generate for our customers. We want to design a system that allows for rapid testing. Again, this is a big opportunity to learn about our customers, and we want to test that and be able to enhance that experience and then plan for change because our customers change over time. Our experiences need to change over time as well. We want to make sure that we have a technology in place that supports that. So the last couple of things to think about in the planning stage, we've talked about the ethical and legal issues. Some other things are legacy systems not communicating. Very few of us get to create a digital experience from the ground up, from scratch. We're talking about working with existing systems. How do we make sure that those systems can communicate with each other, and how do we make sure that we've planned for enough time to solve when that doesn't happen? Where are the gaps in the marketing technology ecosystem? Amanda had that map that showed how big and complex that system can get. There are gaps in those systems. We need to identify where those are and put a plan in place to fill those gaps. So another question, what are the challenges you're currently facing or you expect to face in implementing from an internal perspective? Some of the things are, the ethics and privacy issues that we talked about. Our legal departments are very keen on understanding that and making sure that we're mitigating those risks. Is there organizational readiness and commitment challenges? Again, this is a lot of content. This requires a system to support that. Are you ready for that? Do you feel like you're ready for that? Is there a lack of integration on data-informed decision making? What we mean by that is, are we able to remove subjectivity from our decision making and just look at what the data says our customers are interested in? How do we staff up for this type of experience? And then how do we really identify a meaningful personalization? Do you feel like you understand what would be meaningful to your customers, or is there still a lot of data gathering you need to do and research into your customers? We've talked a lot about the creepy factor, so we don't have to really belabor that point, but organizational readiness and commitment to content is key across the board, whether we're talking about personalization or not. As personalization comes into our approach, it becomes more and more important because we have to have a system in place to support the content, and then we have to commit to it, because if we're trying to serve up relevant content, personalized content, and then don't continue to keep that content fresh, it's no longer going to be relevant. So let's see what you guys are thinking. a lot on organizational readiness and commitment to content. And that, that again is no surprise because it's a big investment. So we understand that. Staffing and meaningful personalization are a couple of other big areas. It's a big investment, so it's something that we really need to prepare for and make sure that we have buy-in in our organization from the highest levels.
So based on where you're at today, you may decide that you need to plan for a couple of side projects to address some of these things that Derek was just speaking about. But even if you haven't checked the box on everything, that doesn't mean that you should shy away from getting started. You can still get a jump start on personalization. And we have a framework that can help you get started. What we've been talking about today is mostly what we call our assess and plan phase. This is where you're doing those assessments, figuring out if you're ready, thinking about your stakeholders, your content strategy, your technology, the way you're going to be able to create and support content, and the way that you're able to measure success, and having all of those things coming into your plan that you're ultimately going to roll out. Your plan should also consist of a roadmap so that you can think about how you're going to, in a very smart way, roll out all of these various scenarios. So like Derek mentioned, we don't want to be doing too much all at once. We need to know what's working and what's not working. The old saying of don't boil the ocean certainly applies here, where it's actually better in our experience to focus on one or two key scenarios, roll those out, test them, analyze them, tweak them as necessary, and see what's working for you. Maybe internally, if your organizational readiness might be a challenge for you, designing and testing first might be the way that you can build that proof of concept or show an initial ROI that might get others on board to move forward with this in a more meaningful way. So you may hang out in what we call the design and test phase for quite a while, and that's okay. But once you have one or two scenarios that you've designed and tested and you know that they're working really well for you and your customers, you've either increased engagement with your customers or you've generated lift of your conversions, then that's when we flow into what we call the build phase. And this is where we're actually implementing this more permanently into our technology systems. So the reason why we don't just dive right in usually is because it can sometimes take a lot of effort, either resource-wise or access to your technology platform, to be able to set this up in a more sort of permanent manner. But once you have all of the data arming you, showing that it's working, then you should have enough confidence to go into your personalization platform and actually set this up, do all of the tagging, and start on your documentation so that everyone knows what's been implemented. And then from there, we go into what we call our grow phase, which is really the continuous optimization of all of these personalization scenarios. So as you roll out one, you've already tested it, but just like you don't launch your website and walk away from it, you want to continue to monitor and test and try new things. And as Derek mentioned, your customers' needs will change over time. Your business needs may change over time. So you don't want to set it and forget it. Just like you don't launch your website and walk away, same thing goes for personalization. But from there, once you have one or two scenarios rolled out and you know they're working well for you, then you can go back to your roadmap and think about your strategic plan, and you can start to implement more and more. And that's a way to really, that we've seen work really well for our clients to be able to build upon these scenarios. It's really easy to kind of get your wires crossed, and because a lot of this is set up using rules-based, if you're not implementing and documenting all along the way in a very thoughtful manner, it's very easy to kind of get your wires crossed. And perhaps you think that you've set up one scenario that's working in one way, and maybe it's actually counteracting another scenario that you've already implemented. So using this framework, we can typically get clients going in about 4 to 6 weeks. But whether it's us doing it for you or you're doing it for yourself, what's most important is that the things that we've discussed here today are things that you should be thinking about, and this is a personalization framework that we know will work for you. So a few final thoughts before we go into our Q&A section. Just as we saw on the previous slide, you want to be very thoughtful and don't try to roll out too many different personalization scenarios all at once. We highly recommend that you crawl, walk, run, and take that approach throughout your journey towards delivering these personalized experiences. You also want to remember that you don't just buy a tool and press play, that you want to be strategic about how you use that tool. The tool and the platform is an absolute requirement, but just buying it and pressing play, just like we've learned with other tools like marketing automation or content management systems, it's not a one-shot solution that's going to fix all of your problems. So make sure that you're being thoughtful about how you are approaching personalization. You also want to make sure before you implement that you're testing. We've talked a lot about this and can't stress enough how important that is, because you may find, especially if you're implementing a more complex personalization scenario that has a lot of different content elements or a more complex user flow attached to it, that you could test certain elements of that and maybe see a lift here, but actually a decrease somewhere else. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the entire experience, testing that, analyzing it, tweaking it as necessary, and refining it before you actually go in and set it up in a more permanent way. And you're using your roadmap all the time to tie this together and think about how you're very thoughtfully going to sequence the rollout of all of your personalization opportunities that you identified during your strategic planning. And then finally, you want to make sure that you have your measurement in place, because we all know that at the end of the day, it's about ROI and are we hitting our success metrics. We want to be increasing our customer engagement. We want to be attracting and engaging in a new, better way, new and existing customers and all of the users who are visiting our website. And we want to be able to show that ROI. Personalization is an investment, just like anything else. So you want to be able to make sure that you're reporting back to your organization the impact of doing all of this. And then you're likely to be able to get that support to maybe build a larger content team or invest in a different sort of technology platform that's going to help take you to the next level. So let's get to some Q&A. Who has a question for Derek and I? All right. Gathering our questions here. Okay. So first question. How can a company work to reduce the number of personas or profiles it is trying to support?
Can you repeat the question?
How can a company work to reduce the number of personas or profiles it is trying to support?
I think it's a matter of really understanding who the most relevant customer is. So again, we don't try to create an experience for all people at all times. We really want to understand who's most likely to engage in this particular channel, who's most likely to be interested in this type of information, and really focus the experience on them. We could go back to the 80-20 rule, right? Like if we are creating content that supports 80% of our customer base, that's essentially covering a lot of our business needs right there. It's not that we want to forget the 20%. It's just that we're not going to focus our experience on that. It's the idea of getting away from focusing on edge cases and really focusing on who's most relevant or most likely to engage in that particular experience.
I agree. I think it also comes down to really analyzing your data and understanding where are the opportunities that you see today. So combining all the things that Derek just said, but looking at, what are the segments that you've already identified and how are those performing today? Do you see opportunities to improve? Do you see areas of friction that you've already identified? Then those are likely going to be the right sort of segments that you would want to think about where personalization could help, either reduce that friction, lift engagement, or drive conversion and increase those conversion rates.
We have a question here about ideas on how to avoid some of those communication missteps like we saw in the ProFlowers example. A lot of it has to do with empathy for our customers. We use our personas to develop that empathy. So it's kind of walking through the scenario, thinking about the types of information we're providing. What happens if our assumptions are wrong? And putting together a plan to mitigate that. Understanding what we're saying and how that might resonate with our customers is really key to that. It's really important to that. It's also why we have a governance structure in place. We want to review these things. We want to have multiple perspectives on that. It doesn't mean we want to have, we're creating experiences by committee, but it does mean that we want to have professionals who are evaluating the experience and making some judgment calls.
Yeah, and you really want to proceed with some caution. Just because we can personalize doesn't mean that we should. So just because there's an opportunity there, we want to make sure that we're being sensitive to the needs of the customer, any sort of privacy that might come into play. And the Pro Flowers example was a perfect one where I'm sure they had the best of intentions of just serving up, very relevant email, making it easy for someone to reorder some flowers that they've already purchased previously. But what they weren't thinking about necessarily was the fact that these people are buying flowers for other people, and a lot of times a flower purchase is somewhat tied to an emotional event, either a holiday or a birthday or some sort of celebration. And so even in those cases, when we're trying to do our best to make it easier for the person, we have to make sure that we're taking those things into consideration, and that even if that was accurate for that person in the moment at that point in time, 6 months later, it might not be, that person might not be in the same place in their life.
So sticking with the idea of personas, because there's a lot of interest here around how we start to personalize these experiences and how it relates to personas. There's a great question here. What percentage of persona building is assumption and observation, and what percentage comes from data? That's kind of a tricky question, because the ideal is that all of it comes from data. A persona should be just a creative expression of data about our customers, about who they are. So we could drop reams of data on our designer's desk or our copywriter's desk and just hope that they'll sort through it to understand their customer. A persona actually just summarizes that information in a creative way. It creates a character to write to. So yes, the ideal is that all of the information is based on data. We do make some assumptions when we don't have data to support certain hypotheses about who we think our customers are. That's why personalization gives us an opportunity to either verify those assumptions or make us take a look at them again and come up with some new hypotheses about who those customers are.
All right, we have another question from our audience. Let's see. How can I persuade my company that content personalization is important? Leadership is hesitant to make the investment. Well, I think we saw this definitely in the poll results, that organizational readiness is one of the greatest challenges that most of you are facing today. And I hate to keep using the same word over and over, but I'm going to say it goes back to data. So I would say, using our framework, we are using the design and test to prototype and pilot one or two scenarios, and then we're using that data to prove or disprove whether it's working for us and where we might need to make some changes. So it's a lot of times hard to argue with data. So if you can carve off a small amount of your budget for a pilot or a small amount of your resources for a pilot, then that's probably going to be your best way to either develop that proof of concept or have some data from the pilot to be able to show and garner more support across the organization. So even if your leadership is hesitant, I recommend that if you have any sort of capabilities to do some testing, that you use that in a way, not just testing how we have done in the past for static testing around optimizing forms and things like that, but really thinking about the content and the engagement optimization that can happen using testing and using that data to build your case internally.
Yeah. Another angle I would take is asking leadership, what type of business are they trying to build? What type of relationship are they hoping to create with their customers? Again, we've cited some statistics that show that customers in general want personalized experience. They want information that's more relevant to them. But we also can think about what is that relationship we're creating. And our digital channels are an extension of our business. They're an extension of those business relationships. And how would we feel if our sales staff had to be reminded every single time they encountered a customer who that customer was, what they had talked about last, what they were interested in the last time they talked? That's the same sort of approach we want to take to our digital channels. This is an extension of that process, and so that's the type of experience we want to create.
So we've mentioned a few times this idea of a pilot. So a great question that someone has asked is, can we provide an example of a simple or small pilot? Yes, I can think of one. So one that we've used for one of our clients was using the geolocation example, similar to what Derek mentioned as one of the methods of detection and one of the themes of personalization. And while this sounds like it could be fairly complex to implement, we really just used some paid landing pages that were already a part of an active campaign. We started there because we knew that they were going to be generating enough traffic to those pages to where we would be able to do some testing and fairly quickly be able to gather enough data to know if it was working or making any sort of a difference as we were trying to personalize that. So the way that it worked was we were detecting the location of the user as they came in to that landing page, and then we were showing relevant locations that that business has that were in that user's geographic area. And we were actually able to see a really big lift from doing that. And we have that case study on some of our blogs if you're interested in reading more about it. But it's just a simple way to use kind of the detection of the person's location and see if having that relevancy of showing locations that are closer to them actually has any impact on their wanting to do business with the organization or not.
So kind of related to that, a great question just came in, is the recommendation that we have an iterative approach to personalization is halfway worse than no personalization? This is one of the few opportunities where halfway is not worse. It's actually good. We've talked a lot about the idea of piloting some programs. Again, the point here is we want to learn about the customer and what's valuable to them. So if we have a very focused approach and start to roll out personalization based on how it's performed in the past and how it's helping those customers do things, that's where we want to start, actually. We don't actually recommend personalizing every piece of content at the beginning. Not only is that very difficult to sustain because we've talked a lot about how much content is required for that, it's also a lot of risk involved because of the things that we've talked about. So having a very focused approach to our testing and piloting is really important. Okay, I think we have a couple more minutes for questions.
Let's see. We have a question from our audience. So how do we understand what's relevant to our customers? Oh, that's a great question because that word relevant gets tossed around a lot. Well, again, I hate to keep being the broken record here, but I think it goes back to looking at the data and testing it. So we can try a lot of different content, a lot of different calls to action, and we can see how people respond to it. Figuring out initially what is relevant and not relevant is usually the greater challenge. So a lot of times that has to come up with some assumptions, or we form a hypothesis to say, based on what we know today, we think this is the most relevant. Hopefully we have some data to back up that hypothesis. But whether we know it's really relevant or not, in my opinion, gets down to being able to accurately track and measure to be able to understand how people are responding. We can also use other data sources beyond our web analytics, like feedback from our Voice of the Customer programs, to make sure that what we're implementing on the site is actually not just showing in their digital behavior and activities on the site, but actually what they're telling us as well. And having those two data sources at your disposal are really combined the best way to understand relevancy, because not only are you able to see what people are telling you, but you're actually able to see what they're doing. And sometimes those aren't always the same thing, interestingly enough.
So Mandy, you could probably talk about this all day, but some of the data points that we actually look for. So click-through rate is obvious, right? Everybody understands to measure our click-through rate. That tells us whether people are actually going to engage with the content. Some other things, for video pieces, for instance, how long did they engage with the video? Did they watch it all the way through? At what point did they drop off? Because that tells us that's where the content ceased to be relevant to them. Other things like shareability. So thinking about how our social channels can be leveraged to tell us more about the customers. How are customers sharing the information we have? What are they sharing? Are among a number of data points that we'll look at to understand how relevant this content is. Because again, we are coming in with some assumptions, and we want to test those assumptions. And the data points that prove out those assumptions or make us rethink them, there are lots of them.
Derek, we have a great question here. I love this question. So how do you gauge when a customer is exhausted from personalized content? This person is saying that they get the same advertising content every day after a recent purchase and that they're tired of it but have no way to stop it. The reason I love this question is because while we are all very excited to start delivering personalized content, I think that we have to proceed with caution, and we have to make sure that we aren't over-personalizing, because it can become annoying, or you can, if you're not thinking about it and rolling it out in the right way, testing it, looking at your data, potentially be sending people down a pathway where they have no way out, and maybe you're not giving them the opportunity to discover on their own. So Derek used in his example that potential for discovery was something that was key to the music streaming sites and how personalization comes into play there. And I think that's something that whether you're on a B2B site or a B2C site that you want to keep in mind is the goal here is not to prevent people from finding your other content. The goal is to provide more relevant content and to respond to the data or the actions that that person is demonstrating in that moment. So you want to make sure that you're not, that you're setting up things like expiration dates on how long maybe these scenarios follow somebody around, or making sure that thinking about the different use cases of maybe a family shared computer. So you might be personalizing an experience based on one user and the things that they were interested in, but what happens when the other person in that household gets on that computer? You're not going to show them anything that is going to be relevant to them, perhaps, but you want to make sure that you're thinking about all of those different scenarios. Same thing goes with devices. So how you might want to interact with content on a mobile device might be different from desktop. So you want to be considering all of those things when you are rolling this out.
Yeah, and I love that question because it's a clear example of what happens when you don't have enough content to support your experience. So clearly this advertiser is just trying to get as much out of a smaller base of content. So if you keep seeing the same message over and over again, it becomes less relevant to you. I'll send Julie a prize for that message, for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So unfortunately, we're running out of time here, but there's a lot of great questions remaining. So I really want to encourage that let's continue this conversation. Let's keep it going. So next Wednesday at 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern, we at ISITE are going to be facilitating a tweet up using the hashtag personalization on Twitter. But in the meantime, we're going to be very active in our social channels, talking about this even more and sharing additional content. And we want to hear your thoughts. This is also a very active, becoming a very active community around this topic. So there's already a lot of great conversations happening. So we invite you to please join us and others who are already passionately talking about this topic online. And finally, as a reminder, the slides will be available after the briefing. You'll receive an email with a link to be able to access the slides. And before we end, I want to send a special thanks to our partner, Sitecore, our promotional partner for this briefing. And thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you.